Today on the pod, we are getting into, we all do done for you services in our accounting firms. That is, clients bring us stuff, we do the work, we ship it out, right? We're all familiar with that. But how about done with you, where like you offer a degree of support to the client, maybe coming down the value ladder a little bit, doing something a little bit more collaborative. On the one hand, it's a good way to get in front of more people and expand your reach. On the other hand, is that really what we do? Shouldn't you just be giving me all this stuff and getting out of my way and letting me do it? We're getting into that, but also because it's a Q&A Friday, how do you not overthink putting stuff out into the world? Like, you make a thing, is it good enough? The struggle of hitting the publish button. My thoughts on SafeSend being acquired by Thomson Reuters, and why it's a good thing. What? Jason, I thought you were cool. What if a niche is too competitive? And the coolest AI email feature that I've seen to date, I'm going to tell you all about it. Come on in, let's do it. It's Jason on Firms. So this one came from, it was a question, I think on the podcast from Musician's Tax Advisor a few weeks ago now. Said, I've already done what you're talking about on the done with you, not done for you sort of down market service offering. Said it's a very steep learning curve and I'm not entirely sure it will succeed. It's targeted at a very niche market. Love to explore whether anybody else is doing this and what their successes and failures have been. As we're talking about this, if you do have experience and have done a version of this, drop that stuff down in the comments. If you're listening on the podcast feed, as most of you do, click through your podcast player. There will be a link to the YouTube video, and you can pop a comment on the YouTube video. Okay, done for you versus done with you. It's a spectrum. Intuit's CEO, Sasan Goodarzi, famously said that Intuit, the company behind QuickBooks and a bunch of other stuff, famously said that Intuit is in the process of becoming a done for you company. It was a company that historically just sold software products. That was all they were known for. But they're transitioning to becoming a done-for-you company. And if you don't really know what this could look like for you, I actually think that Intuit is a helpful example. So they have, for example, TurboTax, their sort of tax software platform, and they have QuickBooks Online. Well, with TurboTax, they started like offering the ability for you to hop onto a call with a tax expert to ask some questions because maybe you're not quite sure what input to or what selection to make. And that went really well when they first launched it a while ago, and that eventually evolved into an even more hands-on service where that professional will basically do the whole thing for you and starting to look a little bit more like just a straight-up tax firm. And that was a progression from like a DIY, do-it-yourself, to done with you, I can call an expert and ask questions, to done for you, they will now do the whole thing for you. Similarly, on QuickBooks Live Bookkeeping, which is Intuit's like, we'll do your bookkeeping for you type of service. It's actually rolled out a little different, I guess, because it started with QuickBooks Live Bookkeeping, which is our bookkeepers will do your books for you. But now they've rolled that back to now there's an assisted version where you can ask for help and ask questions and that sort of thing. So there's a whole spectrum there of DIY, where all you're buying is the software and you just do it yourself. The other end of the spectrum is done for you, where they're handling the whole thing. And then there's something in the middle that is done with you. And most accounting firms, all we've ever done is done for you, right? And it may even be hard to get our heads around like what an alternative to that would even be, because like, I don't want to be liable for something that I've half done or some dumb mistake that a client does, right? Like that's completely reasonable. But as we talked about, I think maybe one of the more important episodes we did here was around the development of the value ladder. In fact, we'll link that episode down in the show notes. This was a really juicy one worth getting back to. Basically, the idea that most accountants have a value ladder in terms of the services they provide to their clients that is like too samey to everyone else's and sort of stuck in this middling kind of like common denominator of what clients want from you. That is, for a tax preparer, you're doing a whole bunch of tax prep because that's the one thing that everybody needs. But we don't have much that goes above that on the value ladder that captures your premium clients and what they're willing to pay. And I'm not just talking about doing more work, I'm talking about doing better paying work. So going up the value ladder with something more premium, but also coming down the value ladder with something either less premium and or free The purpose of doing that being it increases your reach. 10 times as many people find out about you, and that ought to thus increase the quality of the people that then like filter through to those sort of subsequent steps of working with you, right? I mean, it really is like, it is so important as we do this stuff. And I get everybody's allergic to marketing. We're accountants. It is so important to remember how big the world is and how distribution blocked every single one of us are. The fact that people don't know what you do and they don't yet know why something that you can do for them is unique to you. It is something better than maybe what they're getting from their current provider. I mean, you can go post on social media right now. Millions and millions and millions of people can see it. Or you can post something very, very specific for like a micro niche. And those people will be like, oh my gosh, right now I'm working with a generalist. This person actually understands taxidermy businesses. Like, this is great. I will immediately jump and go work with them. And the quality of our firms, by and large, is a product of the quality of that client list. And if we're not doing anything to increase our distribution, if nobody knows you exist, you're not going to have a very good client list. Like, you just don't stumble into that stuff. Will you have a client list? Yes. And so the fact that you can do it does not mean that it is the best way to do it. This day and age is just all about being visible, optimizing for visibility, and letting people know that you even exist. The folks who are not even doing a degree of that, you are fighting with two hands behind your back. And the fact that you can build a business these days doing that is not a reason to do it. It's just a very unoptimized version of doing it. And this is maybe the juiciest argument for done with you services. The notion that we are going down the value ladder a bit to widen our reach and find more people and attract more people who could potentially be great clients. The flip side of this, going up the value ladder, looks like offering something that a small subset of your client base will pay like premium top dollar for. And the trap here, like where people get this wrong, is they perceive this as, no, I'm just going to do more work, more of the same type of work, or get paid the same to do more work. Like this is the big trap with tax planning. Is people think that tax planning means, well, if I usually get $150 an hour or so for tax prep, then if I'm going to start selling tax planning to my clients, I'll just get to do another few hours of work for them at $150 an hour or whatever I normally get. That totally misses the point. Going up the value ladder means doing something that has even more ROI to that individual that they will pay. In my mind, it's got to be like at a bare minimum 1.5x they're paying for the same inputs. So going up the value ladder means not doing more. It means doing something more profitable, that's something that is better for you. And I didn't do this well enough in my firm, as evidenced by the fact that I had like 350 clients in our most premium offering. If you're sitting there with 100 clients or more in your most premium offering, do you really not think that there's not a subset of those clients that wouldn't happily pay you to do more? There is. And you really have to like challenge your notion of what that something more could be, because that could go really far. I mean, that could be CFO services. In some firms, that's literally taking an equity stake in the client's business, which may be unthinkable to you, but I take it from me. If you wet your whistle a little bit in other traditional businesses that are very profitable and not subject to some of the constraints of service businesses like we run, I mean, there's a lot of money to be made, and taking an interest or being an investor or along for the ride on somebody else's thing that is making money can also be a tremendous trap, can also be a way that somebody asks you to do a bunch of free work for them. That's not the move. Taking equity in exchange for not getting paid for what you do. But all that is to say, the top of the value ladder, think about just how high you can push that. I think this is a hot take. Like, I think most people would disagree with me on this, but I'm totally an advocate for doing some version of done with you and some version of DIY, which in our case is like free content, putting out, products or something like that. That is digital products, like info products. Putting that stuff out doesn't cost anything or doesn't cost much, but maybe even going up to like done with you services in order to broaden my reach. Because I'm so convicted that the success of your firm is so tied to your reach. If you got 100 clients on that client list, The most important job you have is to ensure that those are the very best 100 clients you could have. And they absolutely are not like the 100 people who most feel the pains that you solve for. And so as we come down the value ladder to find more people, that starts with what is the free stuff, the thought leadership, what you put out in the world. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's social media posts, maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a website with helpful resources. Until you do this and you show up, nobody will know that you exist. And so you're completely reliant upon referrals, which can certainly build your business, but is a framework that is just not leaning into the bigness of the world and just how many people are out there and the benefits to being visible that you just can't otherwise will into existence yourself. Like if you think you're in demand now, you will be unbelievably more in demand the more visible that you are. I think maybe the most common example of a done with you service that is kind of the norm for firms right now is when you clean up somebody else's books and prepare a tax return with it. That's really like a done with you service because the client gets the books, 80% of the way there. You come in, you fix a bunch of stuff, and then you file the tax return with it. That's really a done with you service. If we go back to, there's that Blair Enns book, the new Blair Enns book that we talked about a couple weeks ago, the 4 Conversations. One of the things that stuck with me most from that book was kind of the 2 approaches to lead generation, to getting people to come and work with you. One was just like sheer volume. Tell those people that you will do anything and everything. But the better approach was what they called the armor-piercing acquisition approach. That is a service that you provide that somebody's current provider doesn't offer. Because all the really, really good clients, they're already working with somebody else. They're not cruising Google reviews trying to find the best rated accountants. Like those are not the best clients out there. And so if we want a foot in the door with somebody who is a really loyal client and a really high quality client and already works with somebody else, offer them something that they're not currently able to get today. That could be a free info product. That could be a done for you service, like help with an industry specific compliance headache where maybe you just review the form that they prepare before it goes out the door, or something like that. The nervous Nellies are like, well, liability, this and that. Like, yes, you have to work through that stuff and think through, like, is this worthwhile or not? Am I assuming responsibility for this and that? The reality is, like, if you're a tax preparer, you virtually don't, because all of our engagement letters, and it's like, we are doing this based on information that you're providing, and we're not offering any sort of assurance on the stuff that you're providing. If the client produces incorrect information, that's generally on the client. But for sure, do your due diligence on whether it's worth it to roll out this new service. But if you look at an industry, a specific group of people, and you can identify something painful to them that's kind of adjacent to all the other stuff that you do, that's usually going to be the best way into working with that client. And then when they have a good experience, they're like, oh, this group's actually legit and they do all this other stuff. I'll just bring this other stuff to them. And that's way, way easier than having to somehow stand yourself up to be the better, like, general accounting firm that will do your tax and your accounting and all that, because they just don't know. And they already work with somebody, and there's so much risk involved for them to just jump ship and stop all the things they're doing with that current provider and go to somebody else. Even if they have a referral, they still can't see the reality of what that relationship is going to look like, which is where, like, a very specific service, and this could absolutely be a done with you service, that is like the armor piercing approach, where I can actually start doing that for somebody that already has another professional relationship. And that's the thing that convinces them to ultimately bring all their stuff to me. It is, this is kind of like DIY stuff and info products, done for you services that are probably going to be a little higher volume and lower touch. Your success of getting that stuff out there, it's going to be very tied to what sort of skills have you developed in attracting attention. Like, are you putting out content that people actually engage with? Is it specific enough to be exciting and interesting to a very particular type of person? Those done with you services, they do require a little bit more of that, but the ability to do that and garner attention for what you're doing, there's arguably no more important skill to have in this day and age. If you can just make everybody aware of what you do, you will never be short of work again in your life. Like I was railing a couple months ago about, like, if you don't know kind of where you're at, or maybe you're not happy with where you're at in your career, if you commit to posting to LinkedIn for the next 365 days and being useful and sharing what you're learning and helping other people, like, you will never again in your entire life be short on opportunities, because the world is so big and we are so reachable and connectable. Like there's just so many ways that we can make new relationships these days if you're just willing to not lurk and like be earnest and not be an a-hole. It's honestly not much harder than that these days. Like even when I look at the stuff that I do, like thought leadership around accounting firm running, so much of where I have separated myself from other people or folks that have done this stuff in the past has just been not being a jerk and being helpful to a different degree than other people are willing to be helpful. Like responding to a high volume of messages and emails and being thoughtful and doing things that people will never see. Like so much of it is just like, what does it look like to be a good person and have this expertise? Like you already have the expertise. That's the hardest part. But then we go back into our firms and we do it in these little private engagements with people that oftentimes don't appreciate us, and nobody ever sees that you have those capabilities. And so nobody finds you, and that's just kind of a frustrating place to find yourself in. This episode is sponsored in part by LiveFlow. Hey, it's New Year's time. People turning up to the gym in record numbers. And if you ate like I did over the holidays, oh boy, is it time to cut back. I'm not proud. But you know one area of our firms that we don't talk about being lean enough with? The information we put in front of our clients. Good golly. The reports we run from our tax software, from our accounting ledgers, you actually think the clients look at that? They sure don't. I can't even get them to read my email, let alone go through a 60-page report. And so if that balance sheet and profit and loss is not something that your client's actually gonna make sense of, or God forbid, the report from, I don't know, your tax planning software, your B&A, gross. If they're not gonna make sense of that, maybe it's time for a better way to put information in front of your client, AKA LiveFlow's new financial dashboards. They can be as sweaty or as simplified as you like. You can connect them with a QBO or a Xero file so they'll pull that data in automatically, and you can augment them with any sort of additional information you want to. I'm a big Notion nerd. It's the closest thing I've seen to Notion for financial stuff. Pretty cool. Okay, we did actually a demo of the new financial dashboard stuff on the YouTube channel recently. Just go search Jason on Firms, LiveFlow, Simple Financial Dashboard, YouTube video. Just pop that in the YouTube search bar, you'll find it. Or check out the link down in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Cloud Accountant Staffing. Hey, scenario, what if you had this buddy that was running another accounting firm and they stumbled into this thing and they start hiring these really good offshore accountants in the Philippines, and you're talking with them one day and your buddy's like, hey, I got some really good people here. You want me to hook you up? You want me to find you a few accountants? What would you say? Would you be like, nah, I'm good. I can find accountants all day long. I don't need more accountants in my firm. Poppycock. You'd be like, tell me more. That's what working with Cloud Accountant Staffing is, because the team behind Cloud Accountant Staffing, they were literally just an accounting firm that started hiring people in the Philippines, had really good luck, like I did with the quality of who they picked up, and then they just started doing it for other firms. It's kind of as simple as that. If you're looking for somebody who understands you, who just works with accounting firms, not some rando sending you cold DMs on LinkedIn, a group that actually does this stuff just with accountants, check out Cloud Accountant Staffing. Link down in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by CoreV Tax Firms. Please do not go headlong into tax planning season without the right tool for the job. You are flying blind, you are wasting time, and you're probably underselling the value of your work. CoreV to help you find like a bunch of tax saving strategies for clients, like not just maximizing retirement contributions, but a whole bunch of opportunities. But the problem for most firms is we undersell the value of our tax advisory work. Across the board, you look at small tax firms, the ones that are absolutely crushing it, people we've talked to on this podcast that are working like half time, making several $100,000 a year, they are making that on the back of charging top dollar for tax advisory. And I honestly didn't know how to do it until I saw a really good tool prove the value of your work. And we kind of forget about it. Like, we understand, like, yes, the stuff that we do is very valuable, but we forget about just how much money we can we regularly put back in our clients' pockets through tax savings and tax deferrals. And then we go out and you like bill the time. You know, it took you an hour and a half to do that. Here's this $400 invoice for that $40K in tax that we just deferred. That mindset shift of how to better capture that value, it's actually made way easier with good tax planning tools. CoreV is my tippy top recommendation. Other tools in the space that do this stuff, CoreV is actually the number one that I recommend. Check out the link down in the show notes to learn more. So personally for me, done with you services, I have no problem with them. I think they need to be tied to a specific industry niche, because the further down you go on that value ladder, the more those efforts are really about finding and attracting people to you. So because you're going down the value ladder, I think they need to be tied to a specific avatar, specific type of person that you're trying to bring in. So it may require a little more, quote unquote marketing, whatever that looks like for you. But because we are also distribution limited, and it all really comes down to the next client who will pay us a little bit better to do the same thing, I think that's a pretty good argument for done with you services. Hard to give a pile of examples of that because it needs to be tied to an industry. I could talk about the industries I worked with. Dental, I would argue that our patient payment or cash reconciliation service was a done with you service. I've talked about this before, but dentists have this problem where patients will pay with cash. The person at the front desk will put the deposit into an envelope. They will post the payment to the practice management system, but then whoever reconciles that cash hitting the bank to the payment that comes into the practice management system. The dentist shouldn't be wasting time doing this, but the dentist also doesn't want to give the person at the front desk banking access, because they're then both handling the cash and can manage banking stuff. So there isn't really anybody in a small dental clinic like that can handle the process of reconciling that stuff. That's where we would come in, and we would work with both the doc and the, whoever the office manager was, to get that as far as it possibly could. And then we would kind of finalize and sign off on it to say yes, all the payments that were posted here came through the bank there. That was a done with you service that was specific to a very, very niche need, but you could dress up marketing for this 100 different ways, from preventing theft in your dental clinic to enabling the doc to have more time chairside where they're actually making money rather than wasting time on admin. Did I say admin? Am I saying admin like a Canadian now? To me, that would be an example of a done with you service that is very closely tied to a niche. Every niche has their own specific set of needs. The people that say every single niche is the same, they're just not deep enough in that niche yet. Those services are there, and they're a great way to attract people to what you're building. All right, this one came up, I probably shouldn't say who, but just kind of the existential crisis of recording a podcast or writing a blog post or making a video. The existential crisis of is this good enough? You watch it back and you're so critical of yourself, right? And oftentimes in the process of doing it, it actually feels worse than it looks like on the other side. I don't know, some people have that experience. There's people that are the other way too, where they're doing it and they're like, oh, this is fine. And then they watch it back and they're like, oh, that sucks. Maybe because they're then comparing it to somebody else, right? But how do you manage the struggle of kind of overthinking how much effort should go into it and whether it's good enough, whether you should be afraid to even publish it? I've got a lot of experience publishing, right? We produce basically 7 or 8 videos a week. I'm on social media every single day. I write actually 3 newsletters a week now. And I can tell you that the ability to press publish is a learned skill. And it's a balancing act to know when should I publish and when should I not publish, because there will be times when you should just let something die. That will happen for all of us. But I would say in the beginning, that voice is too loud. In the beginning, I think you need to be more biased to publishing. I could probably count on 2 hands the number of episodes I've shot for this podcast that I ended up just killing, because afterwards I was like, that doesn't rise to the level of how good I need it to be. And even with that, the nature of a daily show, of anything that you do daily, is there's going to be ones that are going to be bangers and there's going to be ones that aren't. And that's human nature. I mean, that's how we are turning up to work every single day, right? When you're starting out or when you are newer doing something, I do think there is a louder voice in your head saying oh, what will this person and that person say? And I think it's actually usually framed through spotlight effect. And that feeling is oftentimes in your head, you're bouncing the reaction to that off of somebody you know or somebody you respect. And there's a degree of fear of oh, was that good enough? But the real fear is, what will this type of person think or this specific person think? The reality is a spotlight effect. Nobody freaking cares. Everybody is self-centered and focused on themselves and generally only interested in what you can do for them. And I mean, even if you take somebody in my position that puts out a lot of content and a lot of people follow that very closely and they take an interest in you and they're like, no, we want to learn more about you and this and this and that, Jason. Like there's even a degree of that that's like, a parasocial relationship that may not be healthy because like you look at celebrities making, say, political endorsements. It's very easy to point at those people and be like, they're good actors. Why should I be listening to them about literally anything else? But the people that you follow, and I'm the same way, but the people that you follow, you're like, oh, what? Like, I need to know, like, those were cool shoes. I want those. Or like, what is their, advice on raising a family or something like that. And I get that. That's a totally natural thing because I do it too. In fact, I've shared before, like Ali Abdaal's a YouTuber and I think he's cooled off a bit, but there was a time where I was super into his content because it was really good. And he does like productivity content and he did like a day in the life video, which is just like leaning into parasocial relationship stuff, just fully headlong because it's like, well, you're a productivity YouTuber and there's people that just want to follow you around for a day and see what you do. I don't know. It's fine. But he basically shared a whole bunch of products that he used. And at his end of the year video that he does where he shares like all the money that he makes and kind of all the different sources, his biggest source of affiliate revenue that entire year was the skincare products that he shared in his day in the life video. And this is some random productivity YouTuber. He is not a guy that knows anything about skincare routines or anything like that. But a bunch of people that are super into his content, they watch it and he washes his face. In fact, if I ever make a video where I'm washing my face, please tell me it's time to pull the plug. He washes his face and he puts a link to the products that he uses and a whole bunch of people run out and buy it. So there's like a parasocial level to like, oh, people want to learn what you do and stuff like that. But I don't think we need to dwell on that because 99% of people don't give a crap about me. But if they're scrolling their feed and I post something that is related to a problem that they're currently feeling, they will stop and be like, ooh, what can I extract from this? And the parasocial thing's complex, and there's parts of it that are fine and parts of it that are weird that you shouldn't lean into. But what is universally good is being helpful, is putting out stuff that's actually smart and actually useful. And I would argue that's why people engage with my stuff. I think you can't have one without the other. You can for sure get people that like become fans and like will follow you to the different stuff that you do. But I think it has to start with, did I give them something did they extract something of value from what I'm putting out there? So to bring that back to the spotlight effect, the spotlight effect tells you, like, everybody's going to see and judge me based on this thing. The reality is they don't care. They only care if there is something of value that you can offer them. And so after you made that thing and you're like, do I hit publish on this or not? Ask yourself in a cold, heartless way that accountants are very capable of doing because we're wired this way. Ask yourself, is this helpful or not? And if it isn't helpful, probably go back to the drawing board. But more often, we have extremely helpful things rattling around up in our brain that are table stakes for us, and we forget how valuable that expertise is to other people that don't have all the perspective that we have. So more likely than not, we're blocking ourselves from putting something valuable out into the world by having this fear. But it's yet another argument for regularly publishing, for writing every day and developing that habit, because it gets better. It gets easier over time. The ability to press publish, but also the quality of what you're doing is going to suck in the beginning. Like it just will. And if you want to be really good at it, like optimize for repetition. Like that's ultimately what makes you good at something. SafeSend. SafeSend. One of my recommended tax intake tools. I only put the old Jason stamp on 3 tax intake tools. And there's a good number of other ones now that I haven't recommended yet. But the 3 I recommended were SafeSend, Soroban, and Stanford Tax. One of those companies sponsored me early days. A second started sponsoring my stuff after I recommended them. The third one we haven't done anything with. But SafeSend got acquired by Thomson Reuters, legacy company, for $600 million cash. That number surprised a lot of people. And sometimes you can like prop up this number by giving them stock. Like, I know $600 million, but say 400 million of it was stock and something else. Like sometimes you will see that. The fact that this is cash and it's $600 million, that surprises a lot of people. And the reality is, this is kind of a death march for any tool to go into a legacy company like this. Thomson acquired SurePrep back in the day. Normally the way that these things go, the owner, the team, they've got to stick around for X number of years, but they're out of there. Like the whole point, like the cycle of this, they got this big old exit and they're going to bounce. Most accountants, if you sell your accounting firm and you get this big juicy exit, your plan is not to go to work for the mothership until the end of time. Like virtually nobody does that. And so you take a company that's doing cool, innovative stuff, pull them into an environment where there's no development and nothing interesting happening, then cool developments, they stop. It doesn't mean that the product gets worse immediately, though sometimes that is the case. A support will get worse. Maybe support for competitive platforms might get worse, but I'm just generalizing here the way acquisitions normally go. And so for the same reason that I don't recommend SurePrep, even though it is a pretty good product, it just hasn't gone anywhere since Thomson Reuters acquired it. For the same reason, I don't recommend switching to that tomorrow. I probably can't recommend SafeSend anymore, which is too bad because SafeSend's a pretty cool platform. Now, I'll say the same thing for SafeSend that I say about SurePrep. Is if you're on SurePrep right now, I wouldn't necessarily rush to something else. Like it is a pretty good solution. Just don't plan on it getting much better. There's some solutions that are so bad that they're actively hurting you. And an easier example of this is around practice management systems. I put out like a list of here are the practice management systems I recommend. Here's another group of practice management systems that are like, all right, and you don't need to be in a huge hurry to switch. But then everything else, if you're not on one of those, you're costing yourself a ton of headaches, a ton of time, switch. And so SafeSend probably goes into that bucket of like, if you're using SafeSend and you're happy with it, I wouldn't like actively tell you, you must go find something else. But for people to go to it, like net new people, I would send them to something else where I have a greater degree of trust in the development of that over time. And I'm sure SafeSend still has stuff in the pipeline, but like, let's just be real. They put out the letter. Same thing with Dext the other day, getting acquired by Iris a couple months ago. And Iris has acquired stuff in the past and shut it down as well, although they totally will not shut down Dext because Dext isn't a competitive product. It's still really good, but you don't look at Dext now and say like, oh, I can see that getting a whole bunch better because it's now gone through this acquisition. That's just not how things go. Like, let's be realistic. Now, why did I say this was a good thing? Gang, it's a good thing because that just opened a whole bunch of eyes in that ecosystem, and you have a bunch of upstart tax workflow tools. Some are actively getting investment, some are struggling to get investment, and you just saw a $600 million cash exit for a tool. Think about how specific SafeSend is. A tool that is just for US tax professionals. Whole lot of people are licking their chops now. So the investors that were like, is that too specific of a market that I don't really want to get into? The investors who are like, is AI just gonna like start doing all the accounting and tax stuff? So both on the investor and the founder side, seeing a $600 million exit like this in workflow tools for tax, not even tax software, because SafeSend wasn't a tax prep software, it's just workflow. Seeing this size of an exit for tax workflow tools absolutely just dumped gasoline on this category in the best possible way. And I fully expect to see more investment going into it and the category continuing to develop, which is super exciting because the next tax prep platform probably comes from this category. And the biggest time savings we've had for tax firms, and I get not everybody listening to this is tax firms, we'll get off this, but like the biggest time saver we've had for tax firms in the last decade has been tax workflow tools just like this. So, sucks if you're a SafeSend user. Really does. Especially if you're not in the Thomson Reuters suite. Yikers. That may be a situation where you actively look for a replacement. But for the category as a whole, it actually is great news. This episode is sponsored in part by Stanford Tax. Gang, Stanford Tax was one of the original originators of cool new tax workflow companies who have built killer stuff around intake specifically. I've been shouting from the mountaintops, tax firms headed into 2025, you need a tax intake tool. Will save you a massive amount of time. Stanford Tax is one of only a few that I recommend. The whole having to sit down and go through when you got a stack of pilot client information and you're like, okay, here's everything we had last year. Here's what we need this year. What have they actually given us? Stanford Tax, gang, it will generate a complete checklist based on prior year pro forma information of everything that you need. And you can drag all those documents on and it automatically checks off all the items. A stack of 40 PDFs. Drag them on there, it'll auto-resolve all those checklist items. We'll follow up with your clients until they get you all the stuff that you need, and just completely eliminated that entire step of doing 1040 work where you're like, do we start the project yet, or do we follow back up with the client for more information? absolute game changer. Big fan of Stanford Tax. Check out the link down in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Financial Sense. If you were plugged into my 2025 practice management system recommendations, you would have seen Financial Sense on the list. I know a bunch of really smart firms that run Financial Sense. I've been on record as saying it is arguably the best small firm all-in-oneer right now. It's really hard to have a PM that does both tax and accounting work well. And while I'm not a believer in all-in-ones that do everything from tax intake to nailing proposals and all of that, what I am a fan of is the platforms that get closest to that, right? Because at the end of the day, I do want all-in-one. And I also want them to be investing in a more all-in-one path to where maybe right now that feature isn't good enough for me to replace that other tool, but I could see how 2 or 3 years down the road it is. I want that, as opposed to the platforms that aren't investing in that way, right? Financial Sense has actually absolutely been crushing their marketing the last couple of years. They run an annual thought leadership event for accountants that's really good that I've been a part of. They're putting out actually really good social media thought leadership as well, not just around like buy my product, but around better ways to run small firms. And those are the brands I want to get behind. Like those are the brands I want to work with. They got a smart vision for the right way to do it, and the product's going to be a reflection of that. Learn more about Financial Sense. Check out the link down in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Makers Hub. If you've tuned into much of my stuff, you know that I'm a big fan of how Makers Hub is using AI to crush the accounts payable headaches of accountants everywhere. Arguably the domain and accountingdom that is being most disrupted by AI. Well, they recently shipped support for purchase orders. Good golly gosh, how much I hate purchase orders, but they are a necessary evil for companies of a certain size. But it turns out that purchase order matching, matching the invoice to the PO to the receiving slip, whatever you want to call it, turns out that's way, way easier when your AP tool does like rock solid line item extraction. Got my hands on with the PO system that they just plugged in recently. Super, super impressive. If you have clients that struggle with this like I did, oh my gosh, Makers Hub is about to probably save them a whole heckin' lot of time. Learn more about that one. Check out I've got a couple videos on Makers Hub on YouTube that are like quick 5-minute demos. Otherwise, I'll link their website down in the show notes. 2 more here up next. This one's from Tim. Tim Kraus? I don't know. Sorry, Tim. On the subject of niche, this was a comment on the Daily Pod. I mean the Jason on Firms pod. On the subject of niche, I know there are very few niches in accounting that are competitive at all. Pardon me, Tim? But with mine and my partner's experience, the main niche we would probably go after is the same niche Brandon Hall does. He's a giant in the space. So how do you evaluate if a niche is too competitive or not? Tim, take my hand, look me deep in the eyes. Buddy, there's room in real estate for more than one rad firm. I mean, who doesn't do real estate? Especially as you go up to like bigger firms. Every single one of them on their website has, real estate. But real estate is a million different things. I think my biggest objection here is the notion there's very few niches in accounting that are competitive at all. Everything in the world requires accounting. And because of the internet, firms can be more micro niche than ever before. So it doesn't honestly, I look at real estate and I'm like, that seems like a pretty busy one. I would probably go look at something else. Like just me personally, I don't have a personal interest in real estate. Like I've never been that into like rentals and all that. Like it's a whole lot of work. I understand the value of it, but it never personally interested me. So I would probably look at something else myself. But every single one of these things has like pockets big enough to build killer firms. Like after all, like to your point, the goal is to be the firm for a thing. Nobody's going to be the firm for real estate. Somebody can be the firm for about 100 different things inside of what we would all lump into real estate, right? But this is maybe the thing that I shout from the mountaintop more than anything else. And I recognize I'm an internet guy and I make content and stuff. And so like my perspective is biased and different than what most people will feel about this. But there is such unbelievable specificity to be had in putting yourself out there. And like, there are such specific problems out there in the world that you can solve and charge top dollar for, that is always the path forward. And there's so many people in the world that have very, very specific problems that there's enough of a market to build a firm for just about anything. But it takes a shift from purely a production mindset. You could be a generalist firm and stuff will walk in every single day and you'll get referrals every single day. You could be a generalist firm, and that type of business, you are 100% focused on fulfillment, just getting the work done. But where do all of those firms end up? All of those firms end up struggling being price takers because they're generalists. They don't do anything different than anybody else. And so then what do they say? They say, well, okay, we understand now we got to specialize a little bit and get a little bit more specific, but we can't do that until we market and we actually learn how to attract a more specific type of person. So it requires a shift in mindset from being a fulfillment-driven business to really, like, I don't want to say a sales engine, but something closer to that. Because marketing pulls in that specific type of person with the specific pain, and those people you charge 10x the rates of the generalist. My mom's 1040 or my mom's bookkeeping, right? I'm glad this question came up because I do think a lot of people, they look out there and they see, like, what are the things I could specialize in? And they look across the street and they say, gas stations, there's one. Or they say, franchises, there's a Subway. Or they say, oh, there's a couple dental clinics in town, and we kind of go there. But the world is so much bigger than that. And algorithms have made it so much easier to find people and trade shows and stuff like that, to where if we can just find that very specific thing and to your point, be the firm for that thing, go out and talk about what you do, be the most visible person in a space, like working with the software companies in the space, being a guest on podcasts in the space, guest write somebody's newsletter in the space, like do all of those things to make your name the first one that comes to mind for a very specific type of person. Taxidermists. People like to dunk on me bringing up beekeepers a lot. How big is the beekeeping industry? By the way, like every quote unquote industry will also have like all of these adjacent things that you've never even heard of from, I don't even know what adjacent things to, beekeepers would be. The people that do the not the bottling, whatever the process it is of putting honey into a thing that you then sell. Every single aspect of production is going to have all these specialists, right? But until you go down there, you don't know what those things are. And it's like that third and that fourth level of niching where it's awful conversation at a dinner party because nobody knows what you're talking about, but it's an amazing business. Like that's where you want to get to. The global apiculture market size was estimated to be $9 billion. This is kind of the beauty of running a small firm, is I don't have to sit back and be like, what's the TAM? Like a software company does. It's trying to reach like a crazy scale. For me, I can be like, I'd have a hard time seeing me having any fun running a firm, that does more than 10 million a year. And just about any type of specialization or business can fit nicely within a firm of that size. But I'm also like calling out another trap here, which is to ever look more than like 36 months in the future. Because I could also get to a $5 million beekeeping firm and be like, I'm into trucks now. Let's do some truck stuff. What's a niche within trucks? What does that even mean? Like hauling, mud flaps? But that's kind of the beauty of an accounting firm is you don't necessarily have to just stick with that one thing. But by committing to that path and the learning journey of like following through on that specificity, that's a skill that you can then transfer anywhere because you know how to build a specific type of client base. And you can see, okay, last time we wrote a newsletter, and that was where we got 60% of our people from that space was this newsletter that grew really fast because it was the first tax newsletter for beekeepers. And so then when you go do that truck stuff, you're like, okay, we're gonna make the first tax newsletter for truck mud flap manufacturers. And because you had that experience, you're going into it in a more informed way. Remember what I said about it being really bad dinner conversation? I'm a great example. I'm doing something micro niche, not just for accounting firms. I'll say this, not just for accountants, but for people in public accounting who own accounting firms that are small accounting firms that are in the U.S. doing tax. 60% of this episode has been U.S. tax related. I'm sorry. And I'm talking about tax newsletters for truck mud flap manufacturers. A great example of something that would be terrible dinner conversation, but is super niche and can find people and be like truly, truly helpful because it is that specific. Besides, Brandon Hall, come on. Is he really that great? I don't know. Okay, last one. Coolest AI email feature I've seen to date from a company called Superhuman. Superhuman is just an email client. It's the one that I use. It's probably what I'd recommend if you don't have a solid email client built into your practice management system. They launched automatic reminders, but not like requests as we think of them in, say, your practice management system, like requesting information from a client, but reminders that are created automatically based on your outbound emails. So if I email you and I'm like, hey, can you get me this headshot back by next Tuesday? I send that off, But oftentimes I forget about it because it's not hanging out in my inbox, right? Like we kind of use our inbox as a to-do list in some ways if there's something we have to respond to, and it doesn't go away until we respond. But sent stuff doesn't really work the same way. And so now what Superhuman will do is it will remind you before we get to that deadline and be like, hey, do you want me to send a follow-up to this person for you? How cool is that? How smart is that? And it's like, well, yeah, of course. That's not even hard. You throw an email message at an LLM and say, are there any things in here like that I ought to remind that person of as it gets closer to a date? And it's like, no, because the email just says, thanks, Bob. As opposed to an email where you're asking for the headshot and the LLM's like, yes, they need to get this thing back by this date. Create a reminder. Like, that's the value of LLMs. They're really, really good at those open-ended jobs like that. And this is super cool inside of Superhuman, but a fantastic example of where practice management systems, I'm going to get mean, are still crapping the bed. There's so much valuable context in email, but so few practice management systems have a compelling email client. Like the process of writing email in that tool is absolutely terrible. And the process of creating requests is still entirely manual. This feature that Superhuman just dropped, which is super smart and novel, but when you see this, we need to scramble the interceptors and be like, oh man, there's a version of this that totally makes sense in our product. Because most practice management systems now, they have requests. You can see my emails. Make the flipping request for me. Don't require me to jump out and go and do that thing. Give me a pop-up that says, hey, here's a draft request. If you want me to create it for you, just click the button. And now there's an outstanding request, and they'll get reminders, and it just got added to their list of to-dos in the portal. That's so smart, Superhuman. This is super smart. Last year, they shipped generative drafts, which I know I've shared before. Basically, before you even read an email for the first time, it will write 3 drafts for you. So if the email is from my mom and she says, sweetie, do you want to go to lunch next Wednesday? Superhuman will draft 3 responses and give me 3 little bitty cards, 3 little buttons that say yes, no, or schedule a different time. And all I do is click one of those options and it unfurls a draft response. Yes, dear mother, I would love to go on Wednesday. I'll see you there. Or no, I don't want to. And it will write like a polite response. Or let's schedule a different time. And because I can see into my schedule, it will propose other times. And that's so cool to me because it means never writing another email from scratch. Like you get in and it already drafts kind of the different variations. And it's my mom, so I'm probably going to change it. Whereas business communication is probably going to be more general usually, honestly. But it at least gives you like a jumping off point where it has a email drafted in your own voice because it knows how you email. And you click that as a starting point rather than writing from an empty screen. Another thing that's like, if your app has email, and if we want to harp on practice management systems now, if your system has all of the projects we do for that client, all of the files, all the work papers, all the past emails we've exchanged with them, that tool ought to be giving me a pretty intelligent suggested reply to that email. But practice management systems aren't doing it yet. Do it. Do it. I've only been saying this for 2 years now. Started tweeting about this December of 22. 2 or 3 weeks after ChatGPT came out, I'm like, I think the best use case of this magical technology is drafting email replies to clients and pulling in all the other context from the system to inform a reply. So if they're asking for last year's tax return or last month's financials, it's in the file system right over there. So draft a response and attach what it looks like they're asking for. Or I guess generate a request link so that they could like see it in a more secure way, right? Okay, what practice management systems we got that sponsored this episode? Did we alienate anybody? Probably. Practice management systems, man, they're great. I've been giving them some crap lately because I want them to push the envelope more on workflow. And they're listening and they're responding and they're working on it. Like even in the comments of some of my videos, you will see product people. But let's keep pushing them to be better. Gang, thank you for coming and hanging. Friday's my favorite podcast of the week because we do questions and answers. You got questions? Pop them down in the wee little comment section. And I'll see you next week. Toodaloo.